love, lies, betrayal, and the fight to reclaim my life. Let me take you inside a story that will make you question who you can ever really trust. I used to think I had it all figured out. Life, marriage, career, everything seemed to line up so perfectly, at least on the surface. I was the kind of man who believed in hard work, in structure, in building something solid, both at my job and at home. And above all, I believed in loyalty. Loyalty to my friends, loyalty to my family, and most importantly, loyalty to my wife, Reagan. Reagan wasn't just my partner, she was the center of my world. The person I thought I could lean on no matter what storms life threw my way. I believed we were unshakable. But sometimes life has a way of reminding you that the things you treasure most can be ripped away in the blink of an eye. To understand how it all started, let me take you back to a particular week, a few years ago, in early August. At the time, I was working as the chief engineer for a design-build construction firm. That job wasn't your typical 9 to 5. It demanded everything out of me: late nights, early mornings, and, more than anything, constant travel. I was practically on a first-name basis with every TSA agent at the Atlanta airport. Always boarding a plane, always chasing deadlines in different cities. And honestly, I loved it. The chaos of it all, the responsibility of keeping massive projects moving, it was exhausting, sure. But it gave me purpose. I felt needed. Important. Like I was building more than just buildings, I was building a career, a future. That particular week was no exception. I had a flight scheduled out of Hartsfield-Jackson on Tuesday morning, 7:21 a.m. sharp. Anyone who's ever flown out of Atlanta knows that traffic can be a nightmare, so that meant a brutal 4 a.m. wake up just to get there on time. On Monday, I left the office earlier than usual. I wanted to get home, pack, double-check my notes, and, honestly, just enjoy a quiet evening before the chaos began. Reagan was at work when I got home, so I had the house to myself. I remember standing in the bedroom, suitcase open on the bed, making sure I had everything. Shirts folded neatly, socks rolled tight, laptop bag sitting by the door. I thought about how lucky I was, how even with all the traveling, I had a wife waiting for me at home. By Tuesday afternoon, I was in Baton Rouge, knee-deep in problems. The project down there had hit some serious snags, and I spent most of Tuesday and half of Wednesday putting out fires. Our on-site project manager, Etherly, had dropped the ball in more ways than one. I fixed what I could, coached him through the rest, and left, hoping he'd learn from the experience. But deep down, I knew I'd have to keep a much closer eye on him moving forward. By Wednesday evening, I was drained but finally done. Instead of heading straight back, I drove over to New Orleans. There was another project I wanted to check in on. One managed by Mary Jo, a construction manager I had personally trained back in Atlanta. Mary Jo was a friend, someone I respected. She was about to go on maternity leave, and I wanted to make sure her project was documented and organized before she stepped away. And Mary Jo, well, she didn't disappoint. She had everything locked down, every note, every report, every backup plan ready for her successor. That was just who she was. Thorough, prepared, steady. After dinner with her and her husband that night, I went back to my hotel, feeling like maybe, just maybe, I was finally catching a break from all the stress. The next morning, we had a quick planning meeting, and by the afternoon, I was on a flight back to Atlanta. The traffic from the airport to my office was as brutal as always, but I managed to roll in just before 2 p.m. I reported to my boss, Mr. Strickland, gave him a detailed rundown on Baton Rouge, updated him on Mary Jo's project, and recommended tighter oversight on a few problem areas. He listened, nodded, and finally told me, "Trent, you've had a long week. Take the rest of the day off." It felt like a gift. After filing my expense reports, I leaned back in my chair, already imagining the evening ahead. I wanted to surprise Reagan. Maybe swing by the store, grab her favorite flowers, pick up a bottle of wine. I pictured the look on her face when I walked through the door early, for once, instead of rolling in exhausted at midnight. And that's when Ethan walked into my office. Now, Ethan wasn't just a coworker. He was my best friend. My brother in all but blood. We had been inseparable since 3rd grade. He was the nerdy, level-headed one. I was the athlete with too much energy. Where I rushed headfirst into situations, Ethan was the guy pulling me back, keeping me out of trouble. We balanced each other. And after college, I even recommended him for a job at my firm. 6 years later, we were still working side by side. So when Ethan came into my office and shut the door behind him, I didn't think twice. I figured he wanted to vent about work, or maybe grab a beer. "Hey Trent," he said, his face serious. "How was the trip?" "Long," I laughed, rubbing the back of my neck. "But productive. Baton Rouge was a mess, but it's under control now. Honestly, I'm wiped." Strickland gave me the rest of the day off, so I'm heading out. Planning to get flowers and wine for Reagan. Want to actually enjoy a normal evening for once. But Ethan didn't smile. He didn't even nod. His face darkened, and my laughter faded. Relax, man, I said, half joking. No. I'm not fired. Strickland's just making up for all the extra hours. Seriously. What's with the look? He hesitated. His voice dropped low. Trent. This isn't about work. It's about Reagan. My heart stopped. What do you mean? I asked, my chest tightening. What's wrong with Reagan? Did something happen? Why hasn't anyone called me? No never wants the company, what his regenteresses. No never wants the company. The silence in the room was unbearable. Finally, Ethan spoke. Trent, he stammered. She's been unfaithful. While you've been traveling. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a second I thought I misheard him. But the look on his face told me I hadn't. I shook my head. That's not funny. If this is some kind of sick joke, Ethan, get out. Right now. Think about what you're saying. Think about our friendship before you come back. But he didn't move. Didn't flinch. His eyes were full of pain. I wish it was a joke, he whispered. But it's not. Jake Campbell heard from Clay, and Clay's friend was involved with her. That's how the truth got out because she wasn't being exclusive. Hazakt and setting, my vision blurred. Anger, denial, disbelief, all of it boiled inside me at once. No. I snapped. Not one word of that is true. I know my wife. Better than anyone. She wouldn't do that. She couldn't do that. And if you ever repeat this garbage again, I swear to God, Ethan, I'll knock your teeth out. Ethan just sat there, shoulders heavy, like he'd been carrying this weight for too long. Trent, he said softly. I'm sorry. We've been best friends for decades, and I wouldn't tell you this if I didn't believe it. I don't want to see you hurt worse later. My cousin went through the same thing, and it nearly destroyed him. He hired a private investigator who found the truth. If I didn't tell you now, I'd never forgive myself. He slid a small slip of paper across the desk, an investigator's name and number. I stared at it, my hands trembling. My mind screamed that it was nonsense, a ridiculous rumor. Reagan was the woman I loved, the woman who said she wanted to start a family with me. She had promised me her college free spirit days were behind her. She had promised. And I wanted to believe that. God, I needed to believe that. But in that moment, as Ethan walked out of my office, leaving me alone with my thoughts, a seed of doubt was planted. A seed that would grow into something much darker. Something that would change my life forever. Driving home that evening, I tried to push Ethan's words out of my mind. I told myself it was all nonsense, just gossip, rumors twisted and passed along until they sounded believable. That was the only explanation. But no matter how many times I repeated that to myself, the thought stuck like a splinter in my brain. Reagan had admitted, years ago, that she was a bit of a free spirit during college. She liked attention. She had her fun. But when we got serious, she promised those days were behind her. She promised to be faithful. She even went to therapy to help her adjust to married life, and for years, I believed it had worked. I trusted her, and yet, here I was, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I realized, replaying Ethan's words in my head. She's been unfaithful. While you've been traveling, the thought made me sick. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat there for a long moment, staring at the house I had worked so hard to make a home, the place where Reagan and I shared our mornings, our holidays, our dreams for the future. I shook my head, whispering to myself, no. Not Reagan. She wouldn't. I walked inside, carrying the flowers and wine I had picked up on the way. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and before I could set anything down, Reagan came rushing in from the living room. You're home early, she exclaimed, eyes lighting up as she threw her arms around me. She kissed me, holding on to me like she hadn't seen me in years. And in that moment, all the doubt melted away. I kissed her back, feeling that familiar rush of warmth, of safety. She smelled like the perfume I had always loved on her, the one that reminded me of the first time we ever danced together. Her smile, her laugh, it was all real. It had to be. Over dinner, she told me how much she missed me, how empty the house felt without me there. She leaned against my shoulder on the couch, curled up in my arms, and whispered, God, I'm so glad you're home, Trent. It is no wind. Lying there with her, I felt foolish for even letting Ethan's words get under my skin. How could I doubt her, I thought. This woman loves me. She wouldn't betray me. Later that night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind was restless. Ethan had been so serious, so certain. He even gave me the number of a private investigator. I told myself I didn't need it. That it was all ridiculous. That my marriage was strong. But the fact that I couldn't stop thinking about it told me something I didn't want to admit. A part of me wasn't sure anymore. The next morning, Friday, I drove to work with my thoughts spinning. I told myself that I needed to put an end to this once and for all, not to prove Reagan guilty, but to prove her innocent, to prove Ethan wrong, to save my peace of mind. So I called the investigator. Her name was Donna Hyo. She ran a private investigative service out of Atlanta, and her reputation was solid. When I explained the situation, she asked me to come in that Monday afternoon. Walking into her office felt strange, like stepping into a world I never imagined I'd be a part of. She greeted me with a firm handshake, sharp eyes, and a calm confidence that made it clear she'd done this 1,000 times. "Mr. Rowe," she said, "you want me to prove your wife isn't cheating? That's a tough ask." I frowned. "Why?" "Because proving a negative is nearly impossible," she explained. "If I ask you to prove a glass isn't broken, you can just show it to me. But proving a person didn't do something, that's harder. I can observe her moving forward. I can tell you what she does when you're gone. But I can't prove she hasn't done anything before this." Her words hit me. She was right. But at that point, I wasn't looking for absolute proof of the past, I just needed reassurance for the present. "Then watch her," I said finally. "If she's faithful, I'll have peace of mind. That's all I want." She nodded. "Then we'll set it up. Can everyone his place say?" I spent hours going through every detail, our schedules, Reagan's routines, the places she went, the people she knew. The whole time, I felt like I was betraying her trust. Here I was, hiring strangers to follow the woman I loved, but I told myself it was for us, for our marriage, for my sanity. That weekend, Reagan and I had what felt like a normal couple of days. We went to church Sunday morning, grabbed lunch with friends, and spent the afternoon cleaning the house. She laughed as we folded laundry together, teasing me for never folding the towels the right way. But something gnawed at me. When she hugged me after lunch, I caught a faint scent of flowers in her hair. It wasn't her usual perfume. I asked casually if she'd tried something new. She shrugged. "Sample from the store," she said. It was probably nothing. It had to be nothing. But my brain refused to let it go. By Monday, the investigators' team had installed discrete cameras and set up surveillance. I felt like I was living a double life, pretending everything was normal at home, while secretly waiting for updates from strangers who were watching my wife. The following days were torture. I buried myself in work during the day. But every night, I came home to Reagan's smile, her touch, her affection, and the gnawing voice in the back of my mind asking, "Is it real? Or is she just covering her tracks?" On the surface, nothing seemed wrong. She was warm, loving, playful. But late at night, when I closed my eyes, I kept seeing the pained look on Ethan's face. And then came the email. On Sunday afternoon, while Reagan was out running errands, I checked my private email, the one I'd given the investigator. There was a message waiting. My heart pounded as I clicked it open. It didn't give details. Just a short, cold line. "Your order will be ready Monday at 11 a.m. Please contact our office to arrange delivery." I stared at the screen, my stomach in knots. That was investigator speak for, "We found something." And just like that, my world began to crack. Monday morning felt like walking into a storm I couldn't see but knew was coming. I got up early, forced myself through my normal routine, and kissed Reagan on the forehead before she left for work. She smiled at me the same way she always did, warm and loving. But to me, it suddenly felt like a mask. As soon as she drove off, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, waiting for the clock to crawl toward 11 a.m. The email from the investigator had been gnawing at me since yesterday. They didn't write bad news in the subject line, but I could feel it in my gut. By 10:45, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys, drove across town, and parked outside Donna Hyo's office. The building was plain, professional, just another anonymous spot in the Atlanta suburbs. But for me, it felt like the place where my life was about to split in half. Inside, Donna greeted me with the same calm professionalism as before. She waved me into a small conference room, the kind with a long table, neutral walls, and blinds pulled tight against the morning Sunday. "Mr. Rowe," she said gently, sliding a folder across the table toward me. "I'm afraid I don't have good news." My hands trembled as I opened it, and there it was. Photos, videos, reports, evidence, proof. Reagan, my wife. The woman I thought I knew better than anyone in the world, caught with another man. No, caught with multiple men. In our bedroom. In hotels. In cars. I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. My vision blurred. My stomach turned. "No," I muttered, flipping through the pages, my voice breaking. "No. This can't be real. That's not her. That's not," but it was. It was her. The smile I knew so well. The hair she always tucked behind her ear. The clothes I'd seen hanging in our closet. All of it. Undeniable. Donna's voice was steady, professional, but not unkind. We documented her with 3 different men in the span of just 4 days. Some encounters were at your home, some at hotels. This isn't a one-time slip. It's a pattern. It would in white. I slammed the folder shut, my chest heaving. In my house? I growled. Yes, she said softly. In your bedroom. Twice, actually. She was careful changing sheets, spraying perfume, but not careful enough. I dropped my face into my hands. My wedding vows replayed in my head like a cruel joke. The promises we had made. The plans for children we had talked about. All of it shattered in an instant. Why? I whispered. Why would she do this? Donna leaned back in her chair. Mr. Rowe, I'm not a psychiatrist. But I've seen this before. Some people have what's called hypersexual disorder. Others just can't stay loyal. Whatever the reason. It's not your fault. Nightdale die. No friends. Nightdale, I wanted to believe her. But my mind raced with anger, betrayal, humiliation. Every time Reagan had kissed me goodbye before a trip. Every time she said she missed me. Every time I pictured her at home, waiting for me. And now I knew the truth. While I was out building our future, she was tearing it apart behind my back. Donna slid a business card across the table. I recommend a lawyer, George Godwin. Family law, one of the best in the state. If you're serious about ending this, call him. And please, be careful. Don't do anything reckless. I've seen good people ruin their lives chasing revenge. Her warning barely registered. All I could think about was how badly I wanted Reagan to feel the same pain she had just inflicted on me. I left her office in a daze. The sunlight outside was too bright, too sharp, like the world had the audacity to keep spinning while mine was falling apart. I drove aimlessly for a while before finally pulling into Piedmont Park. I sat there for hours, staring at nothing, my mind replaying every memory of my marriage like a film reel I didn't want to watch. Reagan laughing in the kitchen, Reagan holding my hand in church, Reagan whispering, I can't wait to start a family with you. All lies, all poisoned now. By late afternoon, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to scream at her. I wasn't going to beg for answers. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I was going to end this marriage. But not quietly. She was going to feel it. That evening, I scheduled a meeting with the lawyer Donna had recommended. George Godwin, an older man, sharp as a blade, who had seen it all before. When I showed him the evidence, he whistled low and shook his head. Son, he said, you've got an open and shut case. This won't take long. I leaned forward, voice cold. Good. I don't just want a divorce, George. I want her to feel it. Every ounce of pain she gave me, I want it back. Times 10. He studied me for a moment, then sighed. Be careful. Anger can burn you alive if you're not careful. Use it, but don't let it control you. But in my heart, I already knew. I wasn't just walking away from Reagan. I was going to make sure she regretted betraying me. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was restless in some abstract way, but because I was working through logistics, cold, surgical planning, that made the rage feel useful instead of destructive. People talk about revenge like it's a single act, some big cinematic moment. It isn't. Revenge is almost always paperwork and planning. It's details. It's timing. It's making sure when you strike, nothing about it can be turned against you. The first thing I did was the practical stuff. Lawyer calls, bank calls, and quietly making certain arrangements that would give me options. I wanted to leave with dignity and leverage, not with my life and reputation in shambles. George Godwin, he was blunt, old school, and the perfect kind of man for this. Thoughtful, legally clever, and not interested in melodrama. When he told me to be careful, I heard more than caution. He was asking me to be smart, to set up everything so that when the legal storm hit, I would be the one standing dry and steady in the middle of it. Paperwork first, George said after I gave him the folder Donna had assembled. We'll do the filing, and we'll make sure everything is documented correctly. Your instincts about evidence are good. Don't burn bridges you'll need later. I nodded, swallowing the urge to do something reckless. Instead, I did businesslike things. I asked George to draft the divorce petition, and to prepare the paperwork to request temporary orders for property and support. I asked him to handle the spousal support issue aggressively. There are ways to argue that infidelity should influence settlements depending on the case details, and he nodded and said he'd do what the law allowed. Next I went to the bank. I'd always handled most of the household's finances. Reagan and I did this by mutual agreement. I liked tracking everything, signing checks, making sure bills were paid. That gave me a quiet advantage now. I withdrew a substantial cashier's check, and opened a separate account at a small credit union where my name alone was on the account. I did it midday and used my driver's license in the lobby. Like any businessman handling his affairs. It felt absurdly mundane. A man who'd just discovered his wife's betrayals, standing under fluorescent lights, while a bank teller counted out a cashier's check. Why? Because when the storm hit, I didn't want to be weaponless. I wanted a place to put money that wasn't immediately reachable to her. And I wanted to know that if I needed to rent a storage unit, hire movers, or retain additional counsel, I had funds available. That's not dramatics, that's survival. I also canceled a few joint credit cards. I didn't make a scene or wipe them clean. I simply closed them to prevent any later charges that might come from spite. It's petty seeming, but petty things are the scaffolding of larger strategy. You can't spend energy worrying about small financial surprises when everything else is collapsing. Then I called Ethan. He came over within the hour with that same steady presence I'd relied on since we were kids. There are friendships that confront you in your greatest light and your ugliest moments. Ethan was the second. He walked into my house, took in the photos on the mantle, and didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He'd already done that. He sat down, looked at me, and asked, "What do you want me to do?" "Everything," I said, and meant it. "Help me move. Hold my back. Be the guy who makes all the dumb stuff I'll want to do and stops me. And if I ask you to lie, don't. Only the things that matter." He grinned, because that was our language. Honesty carved into friendship. "You got it. I'll help. But you promise me you'll talk to George before you do anything, okay?" He added the lawyer caveat like a covenant. I promised. Then came the most morally ambiguous part. Telling the people who needed to know without turning it into a spectacle. I called Reagan's father Bob because it felt right to tell him first. He and I were friends as well as in-laws. I owed him the truth out of respect. It was one of the hardest calls. Hearing his voice tremble, first confusion, then shock, then that paternal sadness felt like a blow no photograph could depict. But telling him directly meant he heard it from me, not from gossip. That mattered, in a way that is hard to explain. When trust collapses, the people around you get entangled. I wanted to be the one to untangle them with honesty. Then I wrote out a plan. It was clean and terrible in its clarity. 1. File for divorce and serve papers when timing supported maximum effect and minimal collateral damage. 2. Avoid anything illegal or violent. No threats, no physical confrontations. That was Donna's advice and George's insistence. One wrong move and I'd be the one apologizing in court. 3. Move my personal items quietly. Important things, documents, weapons I stored at my parents', tools for work had to be relocated before the house became contested property. 4. Prepare an anonymous package for Noah's wife, because if there was an adulterer in this, other people deserve to know too. That's not pure revenge, it was a complicated sense of right and retribution. 5. Keep my public face calm. People don't often think about appearances during emotional upheaval, but appearances matter. How you comport yourself in public can influence legal outcomes and social perception. 6. Don't give her the satisfaction of breaking me publicly. Let the legal system do that. I marked every item on the list and crossed off the things as they were done. Because crossing things off makes chaos feel conquerable. On Friday morning I met the movers. I arranged them under a pretense. Spring cleaning. Some furniture upgrades. I tipped them generously because professional movers are worth their weight in gold when you are trying to move things that are legally and emotionally complicated. At 9 a.m., I started moving selected items. Framed photographs. I couldn't bear to see thrown on a truck with casserole dishes and bedding. My high-end tools and work equipment, personal documents and wedding albums with the pages I wanted to keep. Ethan handled the heavier things, with that silent competence we'd shared since adolescence. We worked smoothly, as if our lives had always required an occasional clandestine operation. Neighbors noticed. Amy, Reagan's friend, saw the moving van and asked if we were relocating. I intercepted her with a practiced smile and a plausible lie. Surprising Reagan with some new furniture for our anniversary. She nodded, bought it, and walked away. I felt a pinch of guilt making her complicit in the lie. But I was desperate to keep the move quiet. I also took one more step that night. I reached out to Melissa, Noah's wife. Donna had given me Melissa's contact when it became clear Noah was more than just an occasional blind spot. I didn't want to ruin her life, but I thought she deserved to know the truth before being blindsided in some other way. I showed up at the office building where she worked, as a courier of documents appeared of its own telling. A staged envelope with a cropped and blurred photo. A note carefully worded to avoid legal entrapment, but still convey the facts. I was careful, meticulous, because any trace that could lead back to me would cause headaches later in court and in life. When Melissa opened that envelope in the lobby and I watched her face, there was a mix of grief and gratitude, anger and relief. People process betrayal in different ways. Some lash out, some crumble, some plan. She wanted to talk. I told her to be wary, to consult a lawyer, to protect her daughter. I gave her the investigator's number and my lawyer's contact. And then I walked away. I didn't gloat. In that moment, revenge felt less like theatrics and more like balancing a ledger. There were other small acts I took that felt strategically smart rather than triumphant. I changed account passwords, updated online security, and quietly made an appointment at a clinic to check for health-related concerns, because when someone cheats, there are practical risks beyond feelings. It was an ugly practicality, but one that gave me a sliver of peace. On the afternoon I filed the divorce, my hands shook only once when I handed the clerk the folder. After that, a strange clarity swept over me. The law was a slow, steady current. It would carry us both toward a destination that was final and enforceable. I no longer had to keep room for, maybe she'll change in my head. The divorce filing was a lock. It took my anger and converted it into paperwork and schedules and hearings. That night, as the house grew quiet around me, I sat in the dark and pictured how the first morning after would unfold: the hush at breakfast, the awkward meetings, the calls from relatives. I planned my words to the judge, the tone I would keep when pressed. I rehearsed calm in a voice that had been frayed raw with betrayal. Revenge, I realized, wasn't a scream. It was an unshakable calm that followed meticulous planning. And so, when the process server texted the following Monday that she was on her way, I felt something like relief. Not because the hurt had diminished, nothing could make that go away overnight, but because the next step had been executed. The machine was moving. The thing I had built in secret had begun to open. In the quiet of that evening, I walked through each room we'd shared, placing painter's tape on items that were mine. It felt childish and oddly civil, a declaration of ownership in the midst of emotional ruins. I labeled tools, framed photos, a few select books. It felt petty and precise. That marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. I'd made choices, and I stood behind them. Some nights I wondered if I'd become someone I wouldn't recognize, but then I'd remind myself, betrayal had taken something vital from me, and I was taking steps, legal, considered, exact, to reclaim what I could. The storm was coming. I'd spent the calm before it, not in rages or threats, but in quiet, practical moves. The lonely, deliberate preparation had its own cold poetry. And as I turned out the lights, the house felt like a stage set waiting for the actors to enter. I wasn't sure who would win what battle yet, but I knew I had at least planned to fight with my head, not just my heart. The morning the papers were served felt unreal, like watching the same scene play out on a small screen behind a fogged window. I woke with a tightness in my chest that felt less like anxiety and more like a wound that had been stitched but not healed. Ethan called around 10 a.m., voice steady but careful. The sort of voice you use when you're about to be the bearer of news you don't want to give. He told me the process server had arrived at the office building lobby, and that Reagan was on her way up. My throat went dry. For weeks I'd pictured this moment in 100 different ways: screaming, begging, calm resignation. None of them matched the hollow that opened inside me when the phone buzzed. "Trent," Ethan said softly. "She's got the packet. She's in the lobby. She looks, shaken." I listened to the paper-thin noises in the background. A receptionist on the line, a chair scrape, the small cough of a person trying to gather composure. The world became oddly small at that point, narrowed to the space between me and the sound of her breathing on the other end of the call. When Reagan called me, not yet hysterical, but breathless and sharp, I felt the cold certainty of the moment. "Trent, what is this?" she demanded. "Divorce papers? Why are you filing? What is happening?" Her voice broke around the edges, words tumbling out faster than she could order them. There was pleading underneath, raw and immediate, but I had protected my heart with layers of methodical calm for weeks. This was no longer about her pleas. "It's done," I said, my voice even. "Everything you need is in the packet. George will answer any legal questions. I'm sorry it had to come to this." She started to cry then. I could hear footsteps, the rustle of clothing. "You can't do this," she said. "Trent, please. I'll go to counseling. Her voice dissolved into sobs. I let it hang there. Let that moment exist without me trying to fill the spaces with explanations or apologies. The papers were served. The gears were in motion. Word spread faster than I expected. Family members called. Friends texted. A few coworkers speculated. It felt odd, this sudden erosion of privacy where the very thing that used to be ours became everyone's conversation. Bob, her father, called. The sound of his voice over the phone rattled me more than any courtroom ever would. There was sadness in him, but also an odd, admonishing grief, as if he'd watched a favorite painting slowly peel at the edges, and could do nothing but testify to the damage. Neighbors started asking questions. Amy, who'd seen the moving van and accepted my anniversary furniture story, sent a short, worried message, asking if I was okay. I replied in a way that felt both honest and guarded. Handling things. We'll talk soon. Reagan showed up at the house the evening the papers were served. She was a tangle of anger and hurt, accusations flaring then falling into apologies. She was loud in the kitchen, pacing, picking up photographs and letting them slip from her fingers as if they were suddenly too heavy to hold. She demanded explanations who, where, why and when I refused to scream and diminish myself in her melodrama. She tossed her rage into words that were sharp enough to make me flinch. "You've always been controlling," she cried at one point. "You snoop, you monitor, and this is what you do? You humiliate me." There was an ugly righteousness in that statement. Maybe it was part theater, part genuine outrage. Still, it stung. I kept my voice measured. "I didn't want any of this to become a spectacle," I said. "I gave you chances I thought you were taking. When I learned otherwise, I did what I had to do." She shook her head, tears in her eyes, but she looked less like the woman I married, and more like a stranger whose name I once knew. When she left that night, she slammed the door in a way that made me flinch at the sound, though the action itself felt almost small compared to what it represented. Then came the small, invasive indignities that follow a separation. Messages left on voicemail, pleading, begging, venomous. I started deleting them without listening. Friends stopped bringing up vacations or future plans. People's eyes changed around me. At work, colleagues were careful, like they were walking on the eggshells of my life. I understood that. I had ruptured something social and intimate, and the immediate aftermath was full of awkward pity and side glances. That humbling didn't bother me as much as the quiet moments. Waking up to an empty bed that had once been a refuge, seeing her mug missing from the cabinet where it had always lived, those small absences felt like a kind of violence. The judge set a temporary hearing date quickly enough. Hearing the evidence, he wasn't in any mood to tolerate more delay. George counseled patience. Small methodical steps would shape the result. We argued for the termination of spousal support based on adultery, and sought to secure our house and assets. George worked with a quiet efficiency, bundling up our narrative and the evidence in ways designed to be persuasive rather than theatrical. It was during the early days of court filings that I received unexpectedly messages from Melissa, Noah's wife. She'd reached out a few times while the investigation was ongoing, but in the immediate fallout she wrote, "Thank you. I didn't know who to trust." There was a tenderness in that message, a complicated mix of gratitude and grief. I replied once, telling her I'd done what I felt was right in sharing the facts with her. She wrote back a short, brave response about moving forward for her daughter's sake. It was a reminder that while my marriage had collapsed into spectacle, other people were experiencing collateral damage in quieter ways, and those small human ripples mattered. Friends pushed me to go out. Ethan tried to drag me to a bar, to force me into the superficial warmth of strangers and conversation. I went a couple times, sat at the bar with a beer I didn't taste, and watched people laugh and move through lives that seemed unbroken. Dating apps flashed on my phone like guilty little invitations to try again, to reinvent, to distract. I deleted them within 24 hours. The idea of pretending to be light and single while my life was in pieces felt dishonest. Besides, my head wasn't ready. Every time I tried to imagine someone else beside me, Reagan's face would pop up like a cruel memory. Nevertheless, I started testing myself. One night, I agreed to meet someone, a casual date set up through mutual friends. We had dinner, polite conversation, and afterward, I felt the weary disappointment of someone who had tried a thing and found its edges rough. It wasn't that the woman was uninteresting. It was that my heart was not yet available for currency. She was kind and considerate, but she didn't get the nuance of my recent history. How could she? It was mine, visceral and fresh. At the courthouse, the restraining order came as a jolt. George had recommended it after one particularly heated exchange where Reagan had stormed the property and banged on the door, screaming things I didn't want my neighbors to hear. I remember the fear, the brief irrational flash that she might do something dangerous in that moment. The restraining order was both practical and symbolic. It signaled finality. The judge granted it with a tone that suggested he had seen too many domestic scenes in his decades on the bench. Reagan's reaction to that legal boundary was raw anger. She accused me of cowardice. She said I'd weaponized the law to spite her. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was a weapon. But the law was blunt and indifferent, an instrument that simply functioned. In court, I kept to the facts. In court, I was careful to use the evidence, and the law to shape an outcome, rather than my fury. In the weeks that followed, life shifted into a strange rhythm of hearings, phone calls, and small deliberate acts of self-preservation. I attended meetings with my lawyer, updated my will, altered the beneficiaries where necessary, practicalities that felt like pruning a damaged tree back to healthy wood. I checked my health, drove to appointments, and did the mundane things that kept me functional. Ethan babysat me with his presence, helping me shop for a new place, coordinating with movers, and reminding me to eat. Through it all, I wrestled with grief. Not the grief I expected, a quiet, final mourning of the relationship, but a more complex sorrow, rooted in betrayal. It felt almost traitorous, the grief for the loss of a future we had planned. I cried in private, in the car on the way to work, in the shower where the running water masked the sounds. Those tears were not always for what I'd lost in the present. Sometimes they were for the person I'd been, naive and trusting, who had believed in a version of life that no longer existed. Still, some days there were small mercies. Melissa eventually asked me to come to Ansley's birthday 1 year later as a neutral guest, when Noah's presence would be minimal. I declined, but the invitation itself felt healing, an olive branch of normalcy in a world where normal didn't seem to exist for me anymore. My new home in Dunwoody slowly took shape. Boxes unpacked, new furniture arrived, and the rooms that had once echoed with shared life began to host a quieter, more solitary one. People would ask, sometimes awkwardly, how I was holding up. It was hard to answer. Surviving was the honest one-word truth. But it felt insufficient. So I started using a different vocabulary. Rebuilding. Rebuilding was active. It implied intention. It implied that even though the foundation had cracked, something could be constructed anew, stronger and more honest. And so I moved forward in the slow, steady way the legal system demands and the emotional system resists. Each hearing, each phone call, each small act of reclaiming what was mine felt like a stitch in a garment that would someday fit me again. The anger didn't vanish. It cooled into a sharper, more pragmatic edge. The desire for revenge, less grandiose now, was focused on ensuring fairness, financial security, custody of reputation, and a clean legal separation. By the time the judge finalized the temporary orders, I felt less like a man flinging torches, and more like one assembling a plan. The sparks of rage were still there, but they were starting to be used for something less destructive. A careful attempt to salvage a life worth living. The real work, I realized, wasn't retribution, it was healing. And healing, like revenge, took methodical attention. The courtroom was never where I pictured the end of a marriage. For most of my life, I thought endings happened in kitchens, or in cars on the side of the road, or maybe in the hushed corners of a bedroom where one person whispers, "I can't do this anymore." But for me, the end unfolded beneath fluorescent lights, at a long oak table, with a judge presiding over the debris of promises. Reagan sat across from me that first hearing. Her eyes were puffy, red, lined with the salt of sleepless nights. She tried to meet my gaze once, then looked away quickly, as though the weight of my calm stare hurt more than if I'd lashed out. She had an attorney beside her, sharp, polished, with a tone that suggested he'd handled dozens of cases like ours. But I knew something he didn't. I had proof. I had pictures. I had the kind of evidence that cut short arguments before they even began. George, my lawyer, was a study in composure. He had the gentle patience of a grandfather, but when he opened his folder and slid forward the photographs Donna had collected, there was no gentleness. Just fact. Just reality. Reagan's attorney blinked, hesitated, and tried to recover. But the judge had already leaned forward, lips pressed in a thin line of disapproval. That first skirmish went quickly. Adultery was established. Alimony, at least the long-term kind Reagan's lawyer tried to argue for, was dead on arrival. The judge suggested counseling, but George had anticipated it. He reminded the court, with a voice low but unyielding, that counseling couldn't fix repeated, deliberate violations of marital vows. The judge agreed. Reagan broke in then. Her voice cracked across the sterile room. "Trent, please, we can fix this. I needed more from you, and you weren't here. I made mistakes, yes, but you left me alone." For the first time in weeks, anger surged hot in my throat. I wanted to stand and shout. I wasn't alone when I was working overtime to keep a roof over your head. I wasn't alone when I came home early just to surprise you with flowers. I wasn't alone when I believed in you. But instead, I breathed slow, let George's hand on my arm steady me, and said nothing. Silence, I realized, could be sharper than any reply. Outside the courtroom, the war became quieter, subtler. Reagan left voicemails, long strings of apologies and rationalizations. They always started with, "Trent, please, listen," and always ended with either tears or rage. I stopped listening. Deleted them as soon as I heard her voice. She found ways to reach out through mutual friends, asking them to tell me she was sorry, that she wanted just one real conversation. I didn't answer. Ethan was the one who kept me tethered through those weeks. He reminded me that every word I said, every angry reply, every bitter text, could become ammunition. "Don't give her a single bullet to fire back with," he told me one night over beers. "You've already won half the battle. Don't let your temper lose you the rest." So I stayed quiet. Cold. Methodical. But silence has a price. Nights were heavy. The house echoed with absence. I'd moved most of my things already, but still there were traces. The faint outline of where our wedding photo had hung. The empty spot in the kitchen where her favorite mug used to sit. I told myself these ghosts would fade. Then came the restraining order. After one especially volatile night where Reagan showed up at my door screaming my name, pounding her fists against the wood, I called George. The next day, we filed. It wasn't about punishment, it was about space, about safety. The judge signed it without hesitation. When Reagan learned of it, her fury was volcanic. "You're painting me as some kind of monster," she shouted outside the courthouse steps, cameras and strangers watching. I just wanted to talk to my husband. But she wasn't my wife anymore. She was a litigant, a line item in a docket, and the law was on my side. Amidst the legal storm, there was a moment of strange humanity. Melissa, Noah's wife, or perhaps soon-to-be ex-wife, reached out again. She thanked me for giving her the truth, for not sugarcoating what her husband had done. "You saved me from wasting years on a lie," she wrote. Her words carried a weight that surprised me. She was collateral damage, yes, but also a survivor walking a parallel road. We spoke on the phone once. Her voice was soft, tired, but steady. She had a daughter, a little girl named Ansley, and she told me she was fighting for custody with everything she had. "I can't let him shape her future," she whispered. And for a moment, I felt less alone. Not because I wanted her, but because someone else understood what betrayal carved into a person's life. Back in court, the battles continued. Property division, financial accounts, retirement savings. Reagan's lawyer clawed for every scrap, but George was relentless. With each session, Reagan grew more desperate, her outbursts louder, her tears more frequent. And each time, the judge's patience thinned. One day, as we were leaving the courtroom, Reagan turned to me. Her voice was low enough that only I could hear. "You're destroying me." For a long moment, I just stared at her. Then I said quietly, "No. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure I don't go down with you." She recoiled as if I'd struck her. Weeks stretched into months, and slowly, the case neared its conclusion. George assured me the end was in sight. But even as victory loomed, I felt no triumph. Only a bone-deep exhaustion. Divorce wasn't a clean amputation. It was a slow surgery, peeling away layers of a life until all that remained was scar tissue. Still, scars are proof you've healed. And I told myself that once the gavel fell, once the ink dried, I would finally start to breathe again. At least, that was the hope. The day the judge finalized the restraining order, I felt a weight lift. It wasn't joy. Not really, more like the relief of finally unclenching a fist you didn't realize you'd been holding for weeks. Reagan was now legally bound to stay away. No more screaming fits outside my door. No more ambushes in parking lots. No more voicemails where her voice swung wildly from sobbing to seething. For the first time in months, silence was truly silent. But silence doesn't heal. It exposes. It was in those quiet evenings that I started noticing the absence most sharply. The house was too big. Every creak at night sounded louder. I caught myself cooking dinner for two out of habit, then pushing away the second plate, ashamed of how automatic the gesture had become. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Reagan ever thought about the good years, the camping trips, the way we used to laugh over inside jokes so obscure nobody else in the world would have understood them. That hurt more than the betrayal itself, realizing that even the beautiful memories had been corrupted. They no longer felt like shared treasures. They felt like bait she had dangled in front of me before pulling the rug out. George, steady as ever, kept me grounded. "Trent, remember," he said during one strategy meeting. "Divorce court isn't about morality, it's about leverage. We have it. Don't waste it on theatrics." He was right. Each hearing was less about emotions and more about precision. Which assets were mine? Which accounts needed division? Which debts she'd tried to hide? Reagan fought for the house, of course. She cried in front of the judge, painting it as her sanctuary, the place she felt safest. But George cut her down gently, pointing out she couldn't afford the buyout without sacrificing everything else she wanted. The judge sided with us. The house would be sold. Reagan glared at me across the courtroom. I didn't look away. Outside of legal battles, life was strangely fragmented. Ethan tried to distract me with sports, beers, and weekend trips. He dragged me to a Braves game once, clapping me on the shoulder, telling me I needed to be normal again. Normal. The word felt foreign. At work, colleagues avoided the subject. I saw the whispers, the quick silences when I entered a room. I didn't blame them. Nobody wants to talk about infidelity in the break room. But I noticed the difference. I wasn't Trent, the reliable engineer anymore. I was Trent, The guy whose wife blew up his life. It stung, but I carried it quietly. Then there was Melissa. She called one evening, her voice softer than I remembered. "I just wanted to thank you again," she said, "for showing me the truth. For not letting me waste more time with Noah." We talked for half an hour. Nothing heavy, just small things. Her daughter's birthday. The relief of signing her own lease. The strangeness of hearing Noah spin lies even after being caught red-handed. When we hung up, I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself yet. Melissa was the only person who understood the texture of what I'd been through. Ethan cared, sure. My parents sympathized, but Melissa knew. She'd lived her own version of betrayal. That made her dangerous. And comforting. Both at once. Meanwhile, Reagan doubled down on her games. She filed motion after motion, trying to stall proceedings, hoping to bleed me dry with legal fees. George warned me it was a common tactic, one last gasp of control. The judge saw through it. "Mrs. Rowe," he said firmly during one hearing, "this court will not tolerate unnecessary delays. You had your chances. You squandered them. This divorce will proceed." Reagan's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw the college girl I'd fallen for, scared and cornered, but sympathy evaporated the instant I remembered the photographs Donna had placed in front of me, the ones I still couldn't erase from memory. By the time spring rolled around, most of the bridges had burned. Friends we'd once shared chose sides. Her family stopped calling. My mother asked me gently if I ever considered forgiveness. I shook my head, unable to even form the words. Forgiveness felt like letting her back into a house she had already set on fire. And yet, late at night, I'd wonder. Was revenge really enough? Would proving her wrong, stripping away the comforts she'd once relied on, and walking away truly give me peace? Or was I still tethered to her, in ways I hadn't even recognized yet? That question haunted me more than any of her screams, more than any courtroom session. Because it wasn't about Reagan anymore. It was about me, and whether I could ever be free of the shadow she cast. By the time the final hearings were on the horizon, the divorce had become less of a battle between two people, and more of a war of attrition. Reagan kept filing motions, kept reaching for straws that no longer existed. She wasn't fighting to save our marriage anymore, she was fighting to save face, to claw back even a shred of power she'd lost. And I was done bleeding. George had a saying he repeated often. "In war, you don't have to win every skirmish. You just have to outlast your enemy." He was right. Reagan's tactics didn't wound me anymore. They exhausted her. Each stall cost her time, money, and credibility. Each outburst in the courtroom chipped away at the judge's patience. I stayed calm. I stayed silent. And in that silence, I became untouchable. But outside the courthouse, Reagan still tried to reach me. Blocked numbers. Emails from fake accounts. Even letters slipped into my mailbox, written in the handwriting I once loved, now desperate and shaky. Some begged for forgiveness. Others cursed me, calling me cold, heartless, even evil. I didn't reply to a single one. One night though, after tossing another envelope into the trash, I sat on the couch, staring at the blank television screen. A thought slipped in, uninvited. This is the same woman who once cried with happiness when I proposed. The same woman who squeezed my hand in the hospital waiting room when my dad had surgery. How did we get here? The thought lingered, unwanted. And then, it faded. Because no amount of nostalgia could erase the pictures in Donna's folder. No amount of memory could excuse the nights she spent in our bed with other men. Ethan noticed my moods more than I wanted him to. "You look like you're carrying ghosts," he told me one Friday evening over a beer. "Maybe I am," I said. "You've got to let them go, Trent. You can win this war and still lose yourself in the process. Don't let her haunt the parts of you that she never touched." Easier said than done. In the middle of all this, Melissa called again. She wasn't crying this time. She sounded stronger, calmer. "Noah's lawyer tried to play games with custody," she told me. "But I've got full weekends now, and Ansley's starting to ask fewer questions about why Daddy doesn't live here anymore. It's hard, but it's getting better." I congratulated her. Meant it too. After we hung up, I realized her journey mirrored mine. Parallel tracks of betrayal, grief, and survival. But she had something I didn't, a daughter depending on her. That kind of responsibility gave her clarity I was still searching for. The final sparks of war burned hottest in the courtroom one April morning. Reagan, exhausted but unwilling to surrender, tried once more to paint herself as the victim. "Your Honor," she said, voice trembling. "I was neglected. He was never home. I made mistakes, but they were mistakes born of loneliness. Doesn't that count for something?" The judge sighed, tapping his gavel lightly against the bench. "Mrs. Rowe, what counts in this court is evidence. And the evidence shows repeated infidelity. This isn't about loneliness, it's about choices. You made yours. Now you must live with the consequences. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. But inside, something loosened. A knot that had been tightening for nearly a year began to unravel. Afterward, Reagan cornered me in the hallway, ignoring George's attempt to block her path. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. "Trent," she whispered. "I never thought it would end like this. I thought you'd fight for me." For the first time in months, I let myself meet her eyes fully. "I did fight," I said. "I fought for us for years. But the moment you brought them into our bed, the war was already lost." Her face crumpled, and she turned away. That was the last time we ever spoke directly. The war was almost over. The flames were dying down. But in the ashes, I realized something chilling. Victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like emptiness. And that emptiness demanded an answer. If revenge wasn't enough, what came next? When the gavel finally fell, it didn't sound like victory. It sounded like the last echo in an empty canyon hollow. Final, irreversible. The judge's words were simple. Divorce granted. Case closed. But in that sterile courtroom, those words split my life into before and after. I walked out with George, the folder of paperwork tucked under his arm. Reagan stayed behind, her lawyer whispering in her ear, her face pale and streaked with makeup that had run with tears. I didn't look back. For years, I had carried her in every thought, every plan, every future daydream. Now, all I carried was silence. George clapped me on the shoulder. "You're free," he said. "Don't waste that freedom." Free. The word felt strange in my mouth, like trying on a jacket that didn't fit yet. The first nights afterward were the hardest. No court dates, no paperwork, no arguments. Just me and the four walls of a house that no longer felt like home. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space beside me, the indentation where she used to sleep. It was gone now, smoothed over, but I still saw it. I tried dating, almost immediately. Ethan pushed me into it, saying it would help. A casual dinner. Drinks with someone kind. A night in someone else's bed. But every time, I woke up feeling worse, like I'd borrowed someone else's life, and it didn't fit me either. It wasn't women I missed. It was meaning. Work helped. Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Atlanta projects that consumed my time and left me too tired to think. My boss praised me for my focus, but if he knew the truth, he'd realize I wasn't focused at all. I was running. Running from memories, running from questions I couldn't answer. My parents noticed, my mom especially. She'd call on Sundays, asking if I was eating right, if I was getting sleep. One afternoon, over pot roast at their dining table, she said, "Trent, a house is just wood and stone. A home is people. Don't build walls around yourself so high that nobody can climb them." I nodded but didn't reply. Because deep down, I knew she was right. Melissa called again a few weeks later. This time, she wasn't broken. She was steady. Clear. Her divorce had finalized too, and she'd reclaimed her maiden name Ortiz. "I feel lighter," she told me. Like I finally set down a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. I envied her clarity. We met for dinner once. Nothing romantic. Just a quiet meal between two people scarred by the same kind of fire. But as we talked, I saw something in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in Reagan's for years. Honesty. And it scared me. Because honesty meant possibility. And possibility meant risking everything again. Spring turned to summer, and slowly, I rebuilt. I bought a house in Dunwoody. Modest but mine. I unpacked boxes from storage, hung pictures of family, planted grass in the yard. Piece by piece, the emptiness began to shrink. But late at night, when the air was still and the world was quiet, I'd hear Reagan's voice in my head. "You're destroying me." And I'd whisper back into the dark, "No. You destroyed us." It makes it time. Life after the gavel wasn't a clean slate. It was a scar. A scar I carried into every decision, every conversation, every glimpse of the future. But scars mean healing, and maybe, just maybe, healing could turn into something more. Something like hope. Freedom, as it turned out, wasn't a finish line. It was a fork in the road. One path led to bitterness, a life defined by what had been taken from me. The other led somewhere uncertain, unmarked, and terrifyingly open. For a while, I straddled both. In Dunwoody, my new house became a project in itself. Fresh paint on the walls, new furniture. Small details that didn't remind me of her. I spent weekends ripping out old carpet, sanding floors, replacing fixtures. Every nail I hammered felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. But the shadows followed. Sometimes I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, ready to text Reagan some small bit of news, the kind of everyday detail we used to share. Then I'd remember. The urge would dissolve into something sharp. Something bitter. Ethan noticed it too. One night, over a basketball game on TV, he said, "Man, you've got to stop letting her live rent-free in your head." I tried to laugh it off. But he was right. Work became steadier. My boss sent me back to New Orleans to handle a messy project. And for once, the chaos was a gift. Long days on construction sites, long nights in hotel rooms with nothing but paperwork. There wasn't much room left in my mind for ghosts. And yet, they found me anyway. I'd sit in those anonymous hotel rooms, staring out at the neon lights of Bourbon Street, and wonder if Reagan was still with Noah, or if she'd already burned that bridge too. Part of me wanted her to suffer, to reap the pain she'd sown. Another part wanted not to care at all. Melissa reached out more often during those months. Sometimes just a text. "How's New Orleans?" Other times, a late-night call when Ansley was asleep. Her voice carried a quiet strength now. The kind that comes from walking through fire and realizing you're still standing. One night, she said something that stuck with me. "Trent, you can spend your life measuring what you lost. Or you can start counting what you still have. But you can't do both forever." I didn't know how to answer. So I just listened. Eventually I tried dating again. A neighbor named Noelle invited me over for dinner. She was kind, warm, funny in a dry way. We shared a bottle of wine, and by the end of the night, I found myself in her bedroom. It was fine. Comfortable even. But as I lay there afterward, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for connection. And Noelle, as lovely as she was, wasn't it? We stayed casual friends. Nothing more. By the time autumn rolled around, Reagan was fading into the background. The court battles were over, the money divided, the restraining order in place. For the first time in years, she wasn't at the center of my life. But Melissa was. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but in the quiet check-ins, the shared understanding, the way she didn't flinch at the word betrayal. Still, a question lingered like a stone in my chest. Could I ever build something new without dragging the old shadows with me? Because freedom, I was learning, wasn't about walking away. It was about deciding what to carry forward. And I wasn't sure yet if I was ready to choose. By winter, the air around me felt lighter. The endless weight of hearings, lawyers, and shouting matches had lifted. For the first time in a long while, I could wake up and the first thought in my head wasn't Reagan. But healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes it bends back on itself. Melissa and I saw more of each other as the weeks rolled on. At first it was casual coffee, a quick dinner, a phone call when one of us had a bad day. Two people clinging to the only person who truly understood what betrayal felt like. Then, one night after a long dinner, she looked at me differently. Not as a fellow survivor. Not as a friend. But as something more. I felt it too. It terrified me. Because with Melissa came Ansley. A sweet 3-year-old with wide eyes and a laugh that could melt stone. She was innocent, untouched by the fire her parents had walked through. But she was still Noah's daughter. And Noah was the ghost I couldn't stop seeing. I wrestled with it. On one hand, Melissa was everything Reagan wasn't. Honest, kind, resilient. She carried her scars with dignity. On the other, every time I imagined school plays, birthdays, milestones, I saw him there. Sitting in the same row. Breathing the same air. Could I really live a life where Noah was always in the corner of the picture? One night, after Melissa and I had shared what should have been a perfect evening, I told her the truth. "Melissa, I like you. More than I should. But every time I think about a future with you, I see him. And it ruins everything." Her face fell. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She just whispered, "Then I guess we don't have a future." I left her house that night hating myself almost as much as I hated Noah. The weeks that followed were gray. I tried dating again, here and there. But it felt empty. I went through the motions, dinners, drinks, polite laughter. But I never made it past the surface. My mother said I was being too picky. Ethan said I was sabotaging myself. Maybe they were both right. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't looking for just anyone. I was still looking for her. Not Reagan, not Melissa. Someone who could erase both their shadows. Someone who could make me believe again. One night, while staring at the ceiling in my Dunwoody house, I realized something. Reagan had taken years from me. But if I let her, she would take decades more. She and Noah weren't even in my life anymore. Yet I was still letting them dictate who I loved, who I trusted, and who I allowed close. That was the night I made myself a promise. I won't let the ghosts decide for me anymore. Because the only way forward wasn't revenge. It wasn't running. It was learning to love again, even if it meant starting with myself. Spring returned, and with it came something I hadn't felt in years: quiet. Not silence, not emptiness. But the kind of calm that comes after a long storm. For the first time, my days weren't dictated by lawyers, judges, or the constant buzzing of a phone filled with lies and apologies. Life had finally steadied. Reagan remarried Noah. Word reached me through George, who always seemed to know more than I wanted him to. At first, the news burned proof that the two people who had dismantled my life were now standing hand in hand, smiling for photographs. But the burn faded quicker than I expected. Instead of rage, I felt relief. Because if Noah was her prize, then I hadn't lost anything. I had been set free. Still, George reminded me of the practical side. Once she's remarried, your alimony stops. That's one less tether holding her to you. And just like that, the last legal thread between us was cut. Meanwhile, I was carving out something new. I bought furniture that matched my own taste, hung pictures that weren't reminders of old vacations or anniversaries. The house in Dunwoody started to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. Neighbors invited me to block parties and cookouts. I showed up, beer in hand, smile ready. It felt strange at first. But slowly, I found myself laughing again. Not the hollow kind of laughter I'd used as armor, but real laughter that loosened the knots in my chest. Melissa drifted in and out of my life during that time. Sometimes a text, sometimes a quick call. We never rekindled what almost was. But I didn't resent her. If anything, I respected her more for protecting her daughter, for knowing what she needed. Even if it wasn't me. And yet, on quiet nights, I'd think of her. Wonder what might have been if betrayal hadn't poisoned the soil before we ever had the chance to plant something real. Ethan stayed close, always checking in. You're different now, he told me one evening. Not lighter, not heavier. Just steadier. Maybe he was right. Or maybe I was just tired of carrying the weight of other people's sins. Looking back, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't saved me. Winning in court hadn't saved me. Even cutting Reagan out of my life hadn't saved me. What saved me was the simple act of surviving long enough to remember who I was without her. The dust had finally settled. And standing there in the quiet, I knew the storm hadn't destroyed me. It had revealed me. If you've made it this far, then you already know this wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was about survival. About what happens when the person you trusted most rips your world apart, and you have to decide whether you'll stay broken or rebuild. When Reagan cheated, I thought my life was over. When I found out about Noah, I thought I'd never breathe again without bitterness in my lungs. But here I am. Different. Scarred. Yes, but not destroyed. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that pain doesn't last forever. But the choices you make while in pain can shape the rest of your life. I chose to fight smart. I chose to walk away instead of burning everything to the ground. And in doing so, I gave myself the chance to start again. Revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't build a future. Healing does. So, if you're watching this, and you've been through something similar: betrayal, heartbreak, loss, let my story be proof that you can come out the other side. It won't be easy. You'll have nights where the silence feels heavier than the betrayal itself, but slowly, with time and grit, the weight will lift. And when it does, you'll realize the truth. Being broken doesn't mean being finished. Sometimes, it's the first step toward becoming who you were always meant to be. So here's my closing thought. Don't let the people who hurt you decide how your story ends. That power belongs to you. And for me, my story isn't over yet. It's only just beginning. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to remind us we're not alone.